All right, in this video, we're going to be palpating the middle scalene. So I'm just going to be picking up his head and slightly rotating it away from me. So I'm going to go through the origin, which is on the transverse process of cervical vertebra number 2 through number 7. So again, I'm going to show you how to landmark the transverse processes. If you've watched the anterior scalene, you've already heard this, but what I'm basically going to do is start off by landmarking the mastoid process, as well as the angle of the mandible, splitting the difference and trying to sink in, and I should be in front of the sternocleidomastoid. So when I'm sinking in here, I'm looking for a bony object, which is the transverse process of cervical vertebra number 1. So I've landmarked that right here. The middle scalene is starting on number 2, GBP of number 2. So I'm going to go about a finger pad width lower and push the scalene up out of the way. And now I've landmarked the transverse process of cervical 2. Now, unlike the anterior scalene, the middle and then posterior scalene are actually originating on the posterior tubercles of the transverse process of cervical 2 to 7. So instead of rolling forward like I would for the anterior scalene, I'm actually going to stay and slightly more posterior. So I found 2. I'm going to just walk down 3, 4, 5, 6, and finally 7. So the transverse process of cervical 7 is right at the base of the neck. It might be a little bit lower than where you see trapezius, but obviously it's going to be above the clavicle in here. So there's the transverse process of cervical 7. So this muscle has quite a few attachments running all the way down the side of the neck. And for its insertion, it's going to be down on rib number 1 again, just more posterior than our anterior scalene. So to palpate the muscle belly activating, the scalenes primarily do lateral flexion. So again, I'm taking the side of my index finger here. I'm going up against the side of the neck, right over top of those transverse processes. And I'm going to ask him to push his head into the side of my hand. Good. And right here, I can easily feel a roll of muscle belly. It feels quite tight. I'm going to follow that down. And as I get closer towards that rib number 1, I'm going to laterally flex his neck towards me, softening up that space, making it easier for me to sink down towards rib number 1. Now, exiting out between the anterior middle scalene is the brachial plexus, as well as the subclavian artery. So be very, very cautious about pushing too hard in here, because you might cause some numbness and tingling, or you might feel the pulse. So I can feel the pulse in this location, and I'm just more posterior to that, and I can feel the roll of what I believe is the middle scalene. So I'm going to confirm that by asking him to take a nice deep, deep breath in. As he does that deep breath in, right underneath my finger, I feel rib number 1 elevating and the scalene tightening up. So that's confirming that I've found the insertion. So we had anterior scalene on that scalene tubercle, then our brachial plexus, and this is also to rib 1, just a little bit more towards the posterior aspect of it. And that's going to conclude our palpation of the middle scalene.